As the Queen's coffin makes its final journey to London, Charles made his first visit to Northern Ireland as king. There are tensions here because of the post-Brexit trade deal. The Northern Ireland Assembly hasn't sat for months, and the cost of living crisis is engulfing so many. At a time of uncertainty and stress, what role, if any, can the new monarch play?
Also tonight, as the royal cortege moves across the country, are police drawing the right line on the right to protest? We'll discuss that with a former detective and a man who was threatened with arrest for protesting against the new king. And with the war going Ukraine's way again, should that be the cue to back them to the hilt or to think again about diplomacy?
Good evening. In the throne room at the royal family's residence here in Belfast, Hillsborough Castle, Sinn Féin's longest-serving elected representative earlier delivered a message of condolence to the king on the death of his mother. 11 years ago, Sinn Féin boycotted the Queen's state visit to the Republic of Ireland. How times have changed. King Charles told the people here that his family had felt Northern Ireland's sorrows. Tonight, we'll explore whether and how the new monarch might follow his mother's example of trying to reconcile communities who've endured years of tension and violence. Meanwhile, this evening, tens of thousands lined the streets of London as the Queen's coffin made one of the final parts of its journey from Edinburgh to Buckingham Palace. From tomorrow, the late monarch will lie in state for 4 days, as long lines of people are expected to pay their respects. In a moment, we'll explore the future of the island of Ireland with senior politicians and ask how the monarch might influence it. First, here's our political editor, Nick Watt.
Heartfelt tributes to their Queen, the Loyalist Shankill Road in Belfast. Personal messages.
My heart's broken. It's just broken.
And deep emotions, remembering the Queen as her heir arrived. And then a sign of a changed world. A welcome in Irish from a leading Republican in the throne room.
Queen Elizabeth showed that a small but significant gesture, a visit, a handshake, crossing the street, or speaking a few words of Irish can make a huge difference in changing attitudes and building relationships.
Gracious words from Alex Maskey and a response in kind.
I take up my new duties resolved to seek the welfare of all the inhabitants of Northern Ireland.
A new king following his mother, who tried to use the crown as a force for reconciliation, rather than allowing it to be used as a symbol of division. And so the king met all sides. A natural approach today for the king, but a difficult journey for a prince who lost his uncle and mentor at the hands of the IRA.
BBC Radio News. Lord Mountbatten of Burma has been killed by an explosion on his yacht off the west coast of the Irish Republic.
An attack at the height of the Troubles. Yet when peace came, the Queen showed a deft touch. Wowing her guests on a landmark state visit to Dublin. Modern Belfast, a far cry from the dark days of the Troubles when the Queen made relatively few trips to Northern Ireland. It was simply too risky, but she did follow events here very closely and she was fascinated by the peace process. I remember talking to one Irish ambassador to London. When they presented their credentials to the Queen, they swatted up on horse racing, only to find that the Queen wanted to talk about the peace process and all its players in minute detail. On the Loyalist Shankill Road, deep affection.
She gave her life for her work, so she did. She held back nothing.
held back nothing. She was a brilliant, lovely lady.
A lovely Christian lady.
And a lovely
and
Christian
she practiced her Christian faith.
She was a staple in everybody's lives, wasn't she? Like, she was always part. Now I'm in Canada half the time and here half the time, and I'm telling you, we love her in Canada as well.
That support should offer some help to the King, according to one commentator who reflects unionist thinking.
People are quite willing to embrace him. I do think Charles's support, people are a bit warier of him maybe than they would have been of his mother, but I think people are willing to give him a chance. I think people just want to see what he does, and I think for most people with the monarchy, as long as they keep their mouth shut, as long as they don't interfere, I think most people are quite happy to see them just carry on as they are.
Over on the Nationalist Falls Road, mixed feelings. You pleased to see him here?
Couldn't care less, to be honest. Sorry for losing his mother, my dad, but couldn't care less.
It's nice to see anyone coming here as well, but I do feel bad for him though. But yeah, it is. It's lovely. It's lovely. It's a historical event, once in a lifetime, so it's good to actually witness that as well.
A writer for Northern Ireland's main nationalist newspaper believes the King has built up strong relations in recent decades, but he may struggle to match the Queen's delicate approach.
The Queen, in her few appearances when she spoke about politics as they had evolved, had clearly been very well briefed and to a degree scripted, and she didn't have to say that much. Charles is operating in a different world, in a different media era. He may be tempted into longer expositions of his thought than she would have been. He may be secure on that ground, and he may not. I don't know, and I wonder if he knows.
No time to waste, a king on a mission with goodwill in the air. And on the ground, warmth as King Charles forms his own bond with his people.
And Nick, there has been discussion, interestingly, of Northern Ireland politics today, hasn't there?
Yes, I mean, there was that obviously important moment of symbolism of the new Northern Ireland when Alex Maskey, who's a Sinn Féin veteran, read out condolences on behalf of the Northern Ireland Assembly, because he's, of course, the Speaker of that. But then, as you say, some intriguing political discussions. So the King was caught on microphone saying in a very relaxed way to Michelle O'Neill, who's the Vice President of Sinn Féin, "Oh, yours is the largest party in Northern Ireland now, isn't it?" And then Alex Maskey could be heard saying, "Oh, better not say that in front of Geoffrey Donaldson." And who was the next person the King met? Well, of course, that was Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, the leader of the DUP. Now, I understand in his conversation with the King, they did touch on the Northern Ireland Protocol. That is the agreement that poses checks on goods travelling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, and that is why we don't have a sitting assembly at the moment, because the DUP are opposed to it in its current form. As I understand it, the King noted in a very friendly way that the Assembly is not sitting, and Geoffrey Donaldson, as I understand it, said, look, talks are underway, and talked about how there's possible progress, talked about how the EU is listening. And it's interesting today that the EU official in charge of that, Maroš Šefčovič, he gave an interview to the FT in which he said, we could reduce those checks to a few lorries a day if the UK gave us real-time data on trade movement. Should say in the last few weeks, Geoffrey Donaldson had a lengthy session with Maroš Šefčovič at a recent conference in Oxford. So the question, Victoria, really is, did we eavesdrop and get an idea of some serious progress that's being made, or was the leader of the DUP wanting to sort of err on the positive side with the King, but there's still a long way to go?
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you. Now, at today's service of Thanksgiving for the Queen at St Anne's Cathedral here in Belfast was one of her closest aides for 25 years. Lord Brookborough is Lord Lieutenant of Fermanagh and has been Lord-in-Waiting to the late Queen since 1997. We spoke after the service and he revealed that in the very last conversation he had with the Queen back in the summer, she said to him, "I do hope that things are going to get better in Northern Ireland soon." But first, we talked about how he responded when he heard news of the monarch's death.
Well, I think it's been painful for everyone. And I think that there are many, many people who never realised that it might be painful, but they were so used to seeing the Queen and other members of the royal family, but the Queen, on television, when they opened a newspaper, and they've even got them on their biscuit tins, which they're probably in the cupboard. But it was a day-to-day thing of seeing her, and then suddenly she's not there, and it is like a void.
What did this place mean to her, this part of the world?
I think Northern Ireland and Ireland meant an incredible amount. In 2012, she came to County Fermanagh, and that's where she crossed the road between the Protestant cathedral and the Catholic church. We'd say that she crossed a double yellow line in every sense of the word, and it made such a difference to people, not necessarily at the state level. It made such a difference to the people because the Queen had entered a Catholic church. And then, 3 years later, our now King, as he was Prince of Wales, he went to St Patrick's Church in Belfast, where there'd been a lot of community strife between the two communities, and he gave money to it. And those two things meant a very great deal to normal, everyday people.
She, of course, shook the hand of Martin McGuinness, Deputy First Minister, a former IRA commander. As a gesture, how extraordinary was that?
I think that everything she has done in those few years meant so much to all communities, and it really put the monarchy as an umbrella over everything, without being political, without being party, and merely hoping for reconciliation in Ireland. And it was a combination of so many things.
Can I ask you what you think she felt her role as monarch was?
She was the sovereign of our nation and of the Commonwealth. And therefore she was not only the figurehead, but she enabled communication within it. She never spoke to anybody without this amazing smile, and there was a twinkle in her eye. So that person thought that they were the only person.
Do you know if King Charles, as he now is, thinks in a similar way to his mother?
Well, I know that King Charles has very strong feelings for Ireland, and he does visit, or has visited the Republic of Ireland, and no doubt will again. And of course he went to Mullaghmore, and that was a very special occasion. And it is just amazing the effect of his visit to that place, which had such a tragic memory.
Of course. What do you think the effect was?
The effect is reconciliation.
Simple as that?
It is
as strong as that and as simple as that?
Yes, it's as simple as that. It is the effect that his late mother and now King Charles can have by meeting people, by visiting people, and by talking to people. And it's the strength of their communication and affiliation with them.
What will you miss most about the Queen?
I will miss her incredible conversation, her knowledge, which was more than I could ever have on any subject, but also her humour and the way that she was always interested in what other people did or what they were. And I will miss the friendship. We were at Ascot maybe 4 years ago before COVID, and I was in the carriage with the late Queen, with the current Queen Consort and now King Charles. And as we set off in the carriages, the door blew open, and we tried to shut it, and it blew open again, and the Queen had to hold it shut for the rest of the trip, up the racecourse while she was waving.
She held it shut?
She held it shut,
she was waving
with the Prince of Wales helping her, but she held it shut while she was waving to everybody.
Can I ask you what your last memory of her is?
Yeah. We stayed for 2 nights during Royal Ascot this year. When we came to say goodbye to her on the last day, and we had a perfectly normal conversation, and then we said goodbye, her last comment as we turned around was, "I hope that things are going to get better in Northern Ireland soon." And that meant a very great deal to us. She always thought about things around her, and she was terribly aware of every single thing, and that it meant a lot to us that after all that, and saying goodbye, that she thought to say that, and she meant it for everyone in Northern Ireland.
Message of condolence and a speech which didn't shy away from the
Let's talk now to two members of the Northern Ireland Assembly. Matthew O'Toole from the nationalist SDLP, he's the leader of the opposition, in fact. Good evening to you. His party wants a united Ireland. And Emma Little-Pengelly, who is from the Democratic Unionist Party. They obviously want Northern Ireland to remain part of the UK. Welcome to you as well. Our political editor was telling us earlier that King Charles was overheard talking to your leader today about the party's position on the post-Brexit trading arrangements. Does that show, perhaps, King Charles is not going to stand aloof from day-to-day politics? He's going to get stuck in?
I suspect he will stand aloof. You know, it's small
He didn't
talk.
today.
It's always very difficult. And I think that from what I've heard, you know, it's been general statements and comments that have been made. But I think that certainly the King could learn a huge amount from the legacy of his mother, Her Majesty the Queen, in terms of the way that she presented herself as somebody who's really transcended party politics. And I have no doubt that he will do that also.
You were in the room. Did you hear him having that conversation?
Well, there was a general conversation about introducing people and the situation in Northern Ireland generally. It wasn't a detailed conversation. I think the key point I would make is, look, when it comes to all of our post-Brexit arrangements, we all need to get back into government. Today was an important symbolic moment. There were moments of people like myself and others stretching themselves, going to an event which isn't necessarily, you know, I don't represent the monarchist party, I'm not a monarchist, but today was an important moment of demonstrating goodwill and reconciliation on this island, people who have a different tradition, particularly people from a British and Unionist background.
Was it difficult for you?
At certain moments, actually, it was not difficult. Well, I mean, you know, at moments you're talking about a new king being proclaimed, and that is a particularly resonant and important moment for people who I represent, people who Emma represents, who are from a British and Unionist tradition. It's not an allegiance I share, but what is critically important to me is reconciliation, and critical that people who I represent understand that I'm there for them, and I'm there to affirm how important a moment this is for them. But the legacy of the Queen, as Emma actually said, is that she was a huge leader in terms of reconciliation on this island, and she did things that weren't always easy for her.
What did you think of what we saw today, in particular the Speaker of the Northern Ireland Assembly, Alex Maskey, from Sinn Féin, a man steeped in Irish republicanism, expressing sympathy to the head of the British Armed Forces?
Well, I think this has been an incredibly historic day for Northern Ireland. And across Northern Ireland, many, many hundreds of thousands of people had a huge love for Her Majesty the Queen. And the incredible
But I'm asking you about that particular bit of symbolism.
Absolutely, and I think that's why it was appropriate for him. Of course, Alex Maskey is not representing Sinn Féin in this. He is the Speaker of the Northern Ireland Assembly. So I think it's absolutely appropriate for him to have attended and to have said what he has said today. But of course, we have seen participation by Sinn Féin. Again, I think that is welcome. They've been on a very long journey. It was only back in 2012, for example, they criticised the SDLP for participation in the Queen's visits to Northern Ireland and Ireland. So, you know, they have been on a journey. I think that's welcome. And I think it's particularly good that we have avoided this type of political row at a time which is so poignant for so many people across Northern Ireland.
Is there any irony in the fact that the Northern Ireland Assembly hasn't sat for months, but you all did yesterday to pay tribute to the Queen?
Well, look, there is actually, the Northern Ireland Assembly needs to be more than a ceremonial chamber where we go and pay respects to people. It was important that we paid respect to people from different traditions. I mean, yeah, I'll be honest, I'm not a monarchist. I have a different vision for the future of this island than Emma does, but the whole point of the Northern Ireland Assembly is that we pursue either our constitutional aspirations and deal with day-to-day political issues. The problem is we're not doing it at the minute. We're gathering to pay respects to the Queen. Now, important and significant as that is, it's not dealing with the issues that face people now.
So let me put this to you both.
Cost of living emergency in which we're going to face bills that are historic and really difficult.
Absolutely. Let me put this to you. Ian Paisley and Gerry Adams were able to bridge the challenges and the divisions between them, which were arguably much more visceral and searing and painful than the ones you face today. The Queen was able to shake the hand of the Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness, former commander of the IRA. Prince Charles, as he then was, shook the hands of Gerry Adams. But this reconciliation, this bridging of the divide seems to be beyond your generation of politicians.
But I don't think it is. And
why isn't the Assembly
sitting
sitting there?
Important to
why isn't the Assembly sitting there?
That this is not what this is about. It's not about how the parties get on with each other. This is about something which is, of course, the Northern Ireland Protocol. And today, this week, is not the time to go into the detail of that. But of course, this is causing all kinds of issues for Northern Ireland. It has been a point of political controversy. And the DUP have made clear that this needs to be be resolved before the institutions can really get back and working properly. So of course these are big issues that need to be challenged, but this is not about relationships between Matthew or I or any of the political parties or reconciliation. This is about a significant political issue that needs to be resolved. There is a pathway there to do it. It needs to happen sooner rather than later. But of course I think we have to remember at the moment this is an incredibly poignant and historic week where people are grieving for Her Majesty the Queen and celebrating and welcoming the new King. And I think that's what we're focusing on just over these few days.
Matthew O'Toole, do you acknowledge that the Queen turned the monarchy into a force for unity here?
To an extent, yes. I mean, I wouldn't want to overstate it. You know, ultimately, we do have different views on the future of this place and of the island. But what I would say, and I think it's really important to acknowledge, is that the Queen stretched herself, and she did more, particularly in the final decade of her reign, than she had to be honest. And I think, you know, the gestures, particularly that we all witnessed in 2011 at the state visit, were really significant, and it's important to bear witness to that.
So the monarchy has the power to do that?
Well, the monarch, Queen Elizabeth, used her symbolic role. The monarch used her symbolic role to build reconciliation, and I acknowledge that she did that, and I would acknowledge and encourage King Charles to do that. That doesn't delegitimise I mean, I'll be honest with you, Victoria, you know nothing about participation today, and I'm pleased that I participated today because I know how important it is to people from a British and Unionist tradition. It doesn't change the fact that I'd rather live ultimately in a modern republic inside the European Union, but let me say, and it's really critical to say this is why this is a distinct place. In order to get there, what I and people who share my aspiration need to do is build trust and confidence in people from a British and Unionist tradition that in that new Ireland, hopefully in a modern republic inside the European Union, that their traditions, their identity are going to be not just tolerated but treasured and respected. So that's part of what today was about. But it doesn't change my aspiration, it doesn't change my view on things.
You've made that absolutely clear, Matthew O'Toole. Briefly, finally, how important is the royal family to Unionists' British identity? Briefly.
I think it's incredibly important. Of course, this is a constitutional monarchy, and you know, I think we see the value in this when we talk about the values that the Queen give and the inspiration around service, selfless service, around highlighting the incredible work of so many volunteers across this United Kingdom, but also that sense of identity and shared heritage and shared history. That is incredibly important to the people of the United Kingdom, and it's just as important to the people of Northern Ireland as citizens of the United Kingdom.
Thank you both very much for spending time with us this evening. We really appreciate it. Matthew O'Toole, Emma Little-Pengelly, thank you very much. Thank you. And that is about it from us in Belfast. Mark, over to you in London. Hi.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Well, we'll return to the royal story in a few minutes as we discuss whether the police have been on the right side of the line over anti-monarchy protests. But first, Ukraine's recent military successes in the east of the country have triggered a certain breathless commentary from the spooks in Washington and London. The Americans are saying the Russians are in trouble, and their British colleagues that the Kremlin's army defeated in Donbass will likely take years to rebuild. For those who advocated arming and training the Ukrainians in order to recapture lost ground, these successes after months of stalemate are being used to argue for more weaponry in order to finish the job. But other views are also being heard in some Western capitals about whether Russia's setbacks might reopen the door to diplomacy. The battlefield reset continues, with Ukrainian forces making good their advances in many places. But there are questions inevitably about whether it can be sustained and whether the Russian military will regain its balance. Along the 1,000-kilometre front, Ukraine is consolidating its gains of recent days in the Donbass. About 2,000 square kilometres taken in the past 10 days. Then to the south there are reports of Russian troops pulling back in parts of Zaporizhia, and the large-scale offensive around Kherson in the southwest continues to take ground, around 500 square kilometres since it started. What's clear looking over the video emerging from these advances is that the Ukrainians have concentrated their best new kit in their main attacking axes, from Korean-made self-propelled guns delivered by Poland in the Donbass, to personnel carriers provided by the Dutch in Zaporizhia, and even the handful of armoured vehicles sent by Britain. The numbers of these vehicles are quite small though, and Ukraine's supporters are drawing the lesson that more should have been sent sooner.
You have the will to fight, and we have an obligation to give you the means to fight, and you have demonstrated that once you get the necessary weapons, you can use them to defeat the Russians. You are fighting on behalf of all of us, and that's why we wish you all of success.
That message from the former NATO boss is about diplomatic and security guarantees from the West, not just hardware, as the Ukrainians demonstrate that they can recapture lost ground and drive the Russians back. The discussion between allies will resume about just how far to support President Zelensky's war aims.
Well, we're joined now by Alina Frolova, formerly a Deputy Defence Minister in Ukraine and now at a security think tank in Kiev, and Dietmar Küster, a German MEP from the ruling Social Democratic Party, who, with some others, signed a letter 2 weeks ago titled "The Guns Must Fall Silent." Dietmar Küster, if we could start with you first. I don't know whether you heard the former NATO Secretary General there saying we have to give the Ukrainians the weapons they need to finish this fight. Do you think he's wrong?
I think we need dual strategy. On one hand, we must support Ukraine militarily, economically, politically and social. But on the other hand, now there is a big chance for the diplomacy, and the diplomacy opens the door for peace. And I think this is the best what could happen to the Ukrainian people. And Russia has still the capacity to escalate this war. And I'm not sure whether this war, the victory, the military victory of the Ukrainian army is a turning point in this war. There are experts who are not sure whether this will be the reality. And so, from my point of view, there is a good chance for diplomacy and to achieve a ceasefire.
Well, let's pick up that very point with Alina Frolova. Do you share that view?
Well, obviously not, because we have heard almost 100% of experts before, which were saying that we need to negotiate because Ukraine has no power. And if we compare figures of Russian armament and weapons and equipment and Ukrainian, we have no chances. However, as we shown, we have quite a big chances. And the issue is that for now on, Ukraine is in position when we've been threatened to be eliminated as a nation. And in this regard, I think that the only right to make a decision about negotiations and point of negotiations is on Ukrainian side. And only Ukraine is capable absolutely to make this decision and choose the time and conditions when to speak.
And just briefly, Alina, before I put something back to Dietmar, another question. We've heard a lot of frustration from Ukrainians, particularly about Germany and the slow speed of delivery of heavy weapons. Do you think this current offensive would be achieving more impressive results even than it has already if a decision had been taken months ago to step up tanks and other types of heavy weapon delivery to Ukraine?
Obviously, you see that we started this counteroffensive only when we reached some kind of capabilities, which allowed us to move on. Should we got all those weapons and should we got some additional equipment before, we could do it early and we could save, unfortunately, tons of thousands of lives in Ukraine.
Well, that's a point, isn't it, Dietmar Küster, that this caution, particularly on the part of Germany, may well have cost thousands of lives if this type of counteroffensive could have been launched much earlier, if those supplies had been forthcoming.
No, I don't think so. I think the only way to end the suffering and the death in the Ukraine is to achieve a ceasefire and to make clear that the Russians must withdraw their troops, and we must find a way for a diplomatic solution. We must be aware of the fact that the West has always emphasized that we support Ukraine militarily, even with tanks, we support military. Without this support, Ukraine would never have the chance to achieve this victory. But what I want to say is there is really a threat for the world that we are getting closer to the brink of a nuclear abyss, and there is the fear, and I'm really afraid, and a lot of experts are emphasizing this, that there is the danger of an escalation to another, let's say, great war, a nuclear war. And this is very...
taking that point and your point about negotiation, Alina, I mean, I'm sure, and President Zelensky himself has said it, that in the end there will have to be some kind of sitting round the table. Do you think, though, that this success militarily might make it harder for a Ukrainian leader to sit down under circumstances other than those in which all of the lost territory has been retaken? Has it raised expectations in that sense?
Well, first of all, I would like to comment about the previous message that we have 8 years, starting from 2014, when Western countries, including Germany, has like many chances to negotiate with Russia and to reach the agreement together with Ukraine. We spent 8 years, and these 8 years of negotiations led to the aggression which we have. So obviously Russia is not capable to keep any promises and to follow any agreement. And that is why
does it all have to be restored? Sorry, we're almost out of time. Do you think Ukrainians now expect all of the land, including Crimea, to be restored?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, we have no doubts about this, and we have no discussion in Ukrainian society about this.
Alina Frolova and Dietmar Köster, thank you both indeed very much. Well, from Edinburgh's Royal Mile to Parliament Square, the Queen's passing has been marked by solemn crowds and a good many tears. But there have also been protests here and there, something called out or a sign held up, and these have drawn rapid responses from the police or other members of the public. That started a conversation about whether the right to free expression should be upheld at this moment and whether the police might be responding in too heavy-handed a way. Paul Powlesland, a lawyer himself, went to protest in Westminster, starting off with a blank sheet of paper and recorded his encounter with the police.
Why are you not giving me details?
I'm not going to give you. Why would you ask for my details?
Just so I can check and make sure you can be here.
I'm in my city.
You've already said you've been arrested once.
Sorry?
You've already told me you've been arrested.
No, I haven't.
No,
I said other people have been arrested.
Okay. Well, now we've made that clear. I want to make sure you didn't have bail conditions not to be here. So just confirm, you're not going to give me your details.
I was holding up a blank sign. Why are you asking for my details?
Because you said you're going to write stuff on it that may offend people.
I said I was going to write "Not my king" on a sign, and you asked for my details.
It may offend someone.
Who's that going to offend?
I don't know. Someone may be
Not my king. Someone might be offended.
Are you going to listen, or are you just going to talk over me? Is that what you plan to do? Just talk over me continuously?
Go ahead.
No? Thank you. All right. I'll give you some advice.
Well, the Met Police have issued a statement about that incident, saying, "We're aware of a video online showing an officer speaking with a member of the public outside the Palace of Westminster earlier today. The public absolutely have a right to protest, and we have been making this clear to all officers involved in this extraordinary policing operation currently in place, and will continue to do so." However, the overwhelming majority of interactions between officers and the public at this time have been positive, as people have come to the capital to mourn the loss of Her late Majesty the Queen. Well, to discuss this now, we're joined by Shabnam Chowdhury, a former detective superintendent at the Met, and by Paul Powlesland, who you saw in that clip. Paul, you obviously think the police are not policing this right. Why?
Well, I think they were not policing it right, and actually they have got better today. I think the crucial reason is there are two separate things going on here. On the one hand, we have the funeral arrangements and the memorials for the Queen, and on the other hand, we have the accession of King Charles. And I don't intend to protest the Queen's funeral or any memorials related to her, and I don't think many people do. But a lot of people do feel quite strongly about protesting this very political act of the King taking power and becoming Charles III.
Shabnam, complex decisions for officers to make in the spur of the moment. What are the factors they're weighing up as to whether to allow someone to hold up a particular sign or to shout a particular phrase?
Well, look, their job is to, first of all, to be impartial, and secondly, to ensure that every member of public is felt safe and are protected. And that includes those who are protesting, for example, like Paul here. However, if you've got a significant number of members of the public who are there, who are highly charged, upset, in terms of their emotions are high. People have been queuing up and they've been here for hours and hours. There are people that have camped overnight because they want to see the Queen, they want to watch the burial, they want to be a part of this historic moment. And then on the other hand, you've got one or two or a small group of protesters. People are going to be upset by that because they're going to be very protective of Her Majesty the Queen, and therefore there's a possibility that that may incite some form of violence or disturbances. So the police have got to balance the needs of the public and the protesters' right to have their view, because as protesters they've got every right to have their view, whether they pro-Queen or not by chance. And that desire to prevent a breach of the peace could be to protect the safety of the protester, couldn't it, in that context? Absolutely. The power of arrest that they've used in other places as well is a breach of the peace. Now, the breach of the peace may take place at the time if they can remove the protester, because they've got to protect the protester from other members of the public, or they've got to protect members of the public from the protesters. So if they've removed them from the equation, then that's solved the issue. Now, Paul, you said at the beginning that you think things have got better. Now, I know you went out this evening, didn't you?
Yes.
With a sign against King Charles.
So it seems actually that what the sort of media furore yesterday and also the public backlash to this heavy-handed policing has had its effect. Following that statement, I and about 30 other people decided to test if the police were actually allowing freedom of expression. We went out this evening to the Houses of Parliament and we stood outside with various placards. Mine said "Not My King." Various other, some had blank placards, some had other sort of anti-monarchy slogans, and nothing really transpired. We stood there, we made our point. No one was seemingly upset by it. There was no threats of violence, and of course outside Parliament at the moment there's no memorials going on. It's purely a political place. There's no shrines, no flowers, no nothing. So in a way, well, sorry, you wanted to come back on that, Shabnam.
I'd question that it was heavy-handed. I wouldn't say it was heavy-handed. There's obviously a conversation's gone on between Paul and that particular police officer. No arrest was made. There was another incident outside Parliament, as I understand it. The lady was moved on. There was no arrest made there. She was moved outside of an area because there may have been obstruction to a gate. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people are going to be coming into London in the next few days. There are bound to be incidents that sometimes the police may not handle brilliantly. They could perhaps do better. But in general, you're talking about a very, very small amount of incidents, and hopefully it will be a very safe event and everybody will get to say what they want to say, but equally to pay their respects.
Paul, you have mentioned that tonight you and some others did protest and it all passed off without incident. I know some people are very keen to support your right to do that, but some people also saying, look, just don't muck the police about at this particular moment with such a complex operation and emotions running high. Could it not have waited?
Well, I don't think Charles has really waited in his accession, really. He's made numerous speeches. There's been events all over the country with trumpeters announcing him as king. He hasn't waited, and so I don't think we should really wait if we object to his accession. Also, the police haven't been any trouble at all. We just stood there and they carried on wandering past. It really was no problem for them. And actually, I do think it's heavy-handed when they threaten arrest because it's very chilling. I, for instance, couldn't then hold up a "Not My King" banner because I couldn't risk getting arrested with my profession, and a lot of people wouldn't take that risk. And actually, the response tonight was much better because they just carried on walking. It caused no operational problems whatsoever.
Last word. There is a duty in that sense to protect the right to protest from those who would do violence to people just because of their views.
The police have a duty of care to every single member of the public, regardless of what their views are. They're not there to, agree with people's views or otherwise. They're there to protect the members of the public, to make sure that they feel safe and to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to pay their respects and have an opportunity to reflect on what has happened.
Thank you both. Now, we have got some papers that have just come in and a very quick chance to look at them. The Daily Telegraph, the cortege there moving through the gates of Buckingham Palace with the headline, "The Final Homecoming." The Guardian, they've got a political story as their lead, with Liz Truss apparently taking aim at Johnson's junk food rules with the idea of scrapping them. We've had Jamie Oliver on the programme talking about the need to protect that in the past. And then lastly, The Sun, once again a different angle on the hearse moving through the gates of Buckingham Palace. "Welcome home, Ma'am." Well, that's all we've got time for, alas. Victoria will be back in the studio tomorrow. Good night from all of us.